I'm here because, like a lot of people that are on this stage that ran for office, because I believe they have a social conscience, because they know that we can do better than how we're being represented on a national level. It's probably not who we are or who we want to be. So I'm here to hope that I can make a difference. I think I have great partners to do that. So, and with that, thank you very much for all being here. Thank you.
Sarah?
Good afternoon. I am not Senator Ben Cardin. He is stuck in traffic on his way from D.C., so I am pinch hitting for him. But I believe Heather is somewhere. There we go. Heather's with Senator Cardin's office, and she's been a wonderful partner to us at the state level. My name is Senator Sarah Elfreth. I am in the state Senate here in Maryland, District 30, which covers Annapolis and South County. Great partner and delegate Alice Kane. We are very focused on keeping our community safe. We spent a good part of today meeting with our state's attorney in Colt Lightus to talk about loopholes in our peace protective and gun laws. It's June. We don't go back into the legislative session until January, but we are hard at work trying to find solutions to a lot of the gun violence in our communities. So we will not stop until we do that.
Thank you, Sarah. And we are advised that Senator Cardin is on his way and will be here, we hope, before long. Alice Kane, please.
Delegate Alice Kane. I'll just add to what Sarah said. Big part of why I ran for office last year, first term delegate, was not wanting our kids and families or any of us to live in the fear that and the reality that we live under in this country every day, where gun violence is so pervasive. And I ran for office largely after I saw that the person who was in this seat at that time had an A from the NRA. He supposedly represented me. That did not represent me at all. And I'm very proud that I have already earned my F from the NRA. I'm going for an F minus, which they don't actually give, but I want to make them reconsider.
Hi, my name is Alexandra Matieja Novak, and I am the Annapolis area local group co-lead for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. And like so many of you here, it's a volunteer-based organization, and I got involved because I was concerned about gun violence. I am also a gun owner. I grew up my whole life around guns. My dad is a hunter. He was in the military, and I'm married to a hunter. When I hear that there's no gun rights advocates here, I'm like, well, I'm a gun rights advocate. Like, I understand the importance of the Second Amendment, and I also feel an obligation as a gun owner to speak out against gun violence.
Stuart?
I'm Stuart Pittman. I'm county executive in Anne Arundel County. I'm pretty new to politics, but I believe that there's political space for people to honestly say that we need to get guns out of the hands of people who haven't earned the right to own them. And I grew up, got a handgun from my father for Christmas one year when I was a kid. Not a handgun, a pellet gun. Shot clay pigeons with my grandfather with a shotgun on the board of Farm Bureau, and every one of us has a gun, I'd say, in South County. And I think that people who own guns should be at the forefront of regulating guns to keep them out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them.
The question then, Stuart, which we'll pose to you, is how? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Cassandra Profassi. I'm a faculty member at the Bloomberg School of Public Health, and I'm also the deputy director of our Center for Gun Policy and Research. We're one of the leading academic institutions that assess a number of policy issues, including gun violence, gun safety, safe storage. I too am a gun owner. I've been a gun owner for as long as I can remember, grew up in a home with guns. So I bring sort of that perspective of understanding what it means to be a gun owner and the rights and responsibilities, but also understanding the burden of gun violence and the need for evidence-based policies so that we can reduce the burden in our country.
Good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Pendell Charles. I sit on the Annapolis City Council. I chair the Public Safety Committee, which oversees police, fire, and the Office of Emergency Management. I'm a lifelong resident of Annapolis. I'm a retired Baltimore City prosecutor. I handled cases in the juvenile courts division where I was the deputy chief, as well as I handled domestic violence cases. I also trained many attorneys there, including Ann Colt-Litus, who's now a state's attorney. I retired from there. I also trained the police officers there in the police academy for many years. When I retired there, I went to the Anne Arundel County Health Department, where I was the program manager for the Office of Minority Health. I oversaw health messages out to the African American, the Latino, as well as the Asian communities. I'm now with Anne Arundel County Public Schools. I've been there since 2006. The last 7 years, I have been doing community outreach. I'm based at an elementary school in Hanover. We have 800 students, 100 staff. Part of my responsibility was finding a secure evacuation facility for at least 900 plus people. We have regular drills, as many of you know, in the schools. I've been on the city council this is my second term, for 5.5 years. So what I've been doing my entire life gives me a certain lens and perspective and a broad approach, 3 different disciplines: law, health, as well as education. Thank you.
Rhonda, if you trained Ann Colt-Litus, you trained the prosecutor who is handling the case of the alleged shooter in the Annapolis Capitol case. So a very prominent figure in the event that brought us here today. Makes you all the more relevant. Alice Kane wrote a guest column, editorial, about a year ago. And I want her to tell us about the first couple of paragraphs. We actually have a few copies on the table in the back, but tell us the story that you began with.
I began with a story that was about a year ago. I went to the movies with my sons, and my oldest son leaned over right as the movie was about to start and whispered, "Hey, Mom, you found the exit, right? Just in case there's a shooting and we have to leave. It's right over there." And it just chilled me to my core, one, that he was thinking that way, which is a smart way to think, right? After we've seen movie theater shootings, but that he was so matter-of-fact about it, and that was his normal. And just as a parent, something else I said in that op-ed was quoting Rob Hyason's brother, who wrote a column and said they had had a conversation about gun violence shortly before he was murdered. And they had the conversation as fathers, saying, what kind of world are we leaving for our children?
And that,
And
of
that
course,
stayed
would have
with
been
me.
is Carl Hyacin,
Right.
The author. And you said your son was about 13 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it was in his head.
Yeah.
Says
It's
it-
been in their heads since they were in kindergarten, and have active shooter drills and come home and at dinner, how was your day? Oh, we practiced what to do if somebody comes in and tries to kill us. And you hear that as a mom from your 5-year-old? Not okay.
Amazing.
Not okay.
So the topic here is policy and advocacy. And put more simply, it is a question that I'm going to put to each of you right now, which is, all day long we've heard panels that have described the problem, the nature of it, the psychology that goes with it, the experiences. What are we going to do about it, and how?
So we've been elected to office not because you like hearing us speak, but because we have to come up with solutions. That's what a political system is set up for. So I believe we need to come up with legislation, and I really believe on a grassroots level that mayors can make a difference. We can start from the ground up. We can be the stopgap. We can be the gatekeeper. We can be the ones that stand up against guns, for the environment, for our kids, for people, because we can enact laws locally. And I use Pittsburgh as an example. I mentioned this before, but I formed a friendship with the mayor of Pittsburgh after their massacre. And that man and that council were brave enough to step forward and enact 4 different types of legislation that put them in the crosshairs of the NRA immediately. And 1 minute after that legislation was signed, they were sued by the NRA. But Every Town for Gun Safety stepped forward and provided them with legal assistance, which I'm sure that they will do for us if we're brave enough to take those steps. So I plan on marching in that direction with I believe, a very supportive council right now. Thank you.
You just used an interesting phrase. You said you met with the mayor and spoke with the mayor of Pittsburgh after their massacre, as though every city has one. Sarah and Alice, you have worked together, I know, continue to work together on legislation. I believe at least 3 of those bills got through the House and died in the Senate committee. So tell us what you're trying to do, because you're going to continue, I'm certain, with this effort. Tell us what you're trying to do, why you think it's the thing to do, and also tell us what your prospects are.
Thank you, Terry. I want to start by saying that Maryland has been incredibly progressive in terms of our gun laws. That's not to say they're perfect. Our job is to continuously reevaluate how those gun laws are implemented on an everyday basis. And that's what we spent this afternoon doing, is taking a fine-tooth comb between peace protective orders and emergency protective orders, the red flag law that went into effect last year, and looking at how, in practicality, those laws are implemented and if they are in fact keeping our community safe. And I got to tell you, just an hour and a half with our state's attorney today, and Delegate Shanika Henson was with us, who couldn't be here today. We were all left just mouths agape, because there is so much work to be done. This past legislative session, we tried to get through a bill that would have regulated long guns the way we regulate handguns. And unfortunately, we know that both in the Capitol Gazette shooting and then the unfortunate tragedy in Glen Burnie just a few months ago, long guns, unregulated long guns, were used in both of those cases. So we sat today and looked at what happened in both of those cases, how we can prevent them moving forward. And there's so much to do. I don't even know where to begin, because we're still wrapping our heads around it. But clearly, the spirit of the law is for protective orders and red flag orders to take the guns out of the hands of people who own them currently if they threaten violence to an extent. But we realized, sitting around this table, that there's nothing to prevent someone from purchasing a gun moving forward for that year that they have that protective order. So clearly a loophole in the law. So things like that we're looking at very, very carefully, and we want to put together a package of legislation we can introduce in January.
Right, but in the earlier panel, and I put this to both of you, the point was made that of the cases where police action has begun trying to identify people who have guns who shouldn't, the number of actual prosecutions was a handful. In fact, in the state of Maryland, 9 versus thousands of cases. So, Alice, tell us what you're trying to do legislatively and how you're going to do it.
So, so in addition to the bill Sarah mentioned, I think something else really important, and that we got through the House but did not make it through the Senate, was banning 3D printed guns. And this is something that was a big priority also for Speaker Bush. We had multiple conversations with him about that, and I hope we will be able to get through, as part of his legacy, next session, get it all the way through. But those guns are not detectable in metal detectors. So they completely circumvent all the laws that are already out there right now. And
you're trying that knowing, I'm sure, that the history of legislation to stop technology is checkered at best.
Yeah, and it's not I mean, the technology unfortunately exists, but this is banning it from Maryland, so at least there's a prohibition and a penalty and all of that. The other piece of legislation that passed both houses but was vetoed by the governor was the Handgun Review Board. And right now, we have state police law enforcement agencies saying that people should not be approved for a concealed carry license, and they're being overruled about 80+% of the time, 80+% of the time, by a board of political appointees. And, you know, personally, I would rather have law enforcement making those decisions than political appointees making those decisions. So I am very hopeful and fairly confident that we will override those vetoes when we come back in January. But there's other bills.
You expect the veto to be repeated?
I do. I do in the House, and I'll let Sarah speak for the Senate. Yeah, to override it.
But the governor's veto to be repeated is my point. That he will do it. Yes. All right. Go ahead.
So another bill. I mean, there were some other ones that did not make it all the way through that we need to continue. Jared Solomon, a delegate from Montgomery County, introduced a bill to which all of these I co-sponsored, but this was to prohibit Maryland from using our federal or state dollars to purchase handguns to arm teachers in the classroom, which is something the Trump administration has bent some rules to allow states to do that. So us saying, not in Maryland, we won't. That one did not make it all the way through, but I believe he intends to reintroduce it. And then as Sarah said, we literally got at least 15 to 20 ideas today for other bills that should be introduced to close existing loopholes, particularly around something like 20% of mass shooters have a history of domestic violence in our country. And right now there are loopholes like Swiss cheese for domestic abusers to still have access to guns. So that seems like a pretty important one to act on ASAP.
Alexander? So the question again is, what are we going to do about this problem that we've been talking about all day?
All right.
And how are we going to do it?
Okay, so the two biggest policies that have been shown to make a difference in reducing gun violence are background checks and safe storage laws. So background checks are really important. We do not currently have universal background checks here in the state of Maryland. Long guns, which includes shotguns and rifles, bought through a private seller, you do not have to go through a background check. Also, in terms of the type of gun violence that we still experience here in Maryland, we do have relatively strong laws. If you look at our gun violence rates, Maryland is actually an anomaly. I was just showing Senator Elfreth a plot where for gun laws, we're in the A category. We get the A rating for strong gun laws. But when it comes to fatalities, we're a spike compared to other states that also have A-rated gun laws. And a big problem with that is gun trafficking. Maryland is a target for gun traffickers, and one reason for that is because we don't have universal background checks. Not having universal background checks is an open for business sign at our state border for gun traffickers, and that is a problem that we have in this state. As far as safe storage laws goes, the majority of school shootings that are committed by minors, those guns are coming from the home, and we've, even here in Maryland, the Great Mills High School shooter, he shot his ex-girlfriend, he got his gun from the home. And so there's a lot of research that shows that safe storage laws can actually go a really long way in protecting children from gun violence. And just to let you all know, a lot of people don't know this, gun violence is the second leading cause of death for American children and the first leading cause of death for African American children. So it's clearly a problem and it needs to be addressed.
Stuart Pittman, so the question to you is, what can we do and how can we do it at the county level?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say that I'm feeling optimistic that there's a lot. I think the reason that there are so many great proposals that you've heard today that haven't been done is that politicians have been scared to do any of them. And right now we see the NRA hopefully collapsing. They're in serious trouble. We've elected people. Who shouldn't have been in office. My predecessor actually said when he testified against the 2013 bill when he was a delegate, he said that the Second Amendment is not about hunting. It's not about even self-defense. It's about standing up to tyrannical government. And so there has been this movement that literally works to sell guns in the community by telling people it's a way to express themselves politically and stand up to our military and our police and our government. Fortunately, our police they're the ones out there whose lives are threatened by guns more often than any of us. They're the ones who actually go to the person holding the gun and try to take it away. So what can we do at the local level? I think the red flag law that passed is a great tool, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it's being implemented. And I talked to Chief.
Explain that. Explain that.
It's the emergency protective orders that that police and or relatives can ask to have somebody's gun taken away if they think that they're a threat to public safety. And in Anne Arundel County, this it took effect in October of last year, so we haven't even been through a year of it. In Anne Arundel County, our police have taken away 60 guns from 52 people, and the vast majority of those were not turned in by family. They were actually the police department who said that person should not have a gun. And I think our police often know who should not have guns. So that's a step towards actually doing the brave thing of taking guns away from people who have them and shouldn't have them. The state has done with the NRA, has done a very good job of preventing local jurisdictions from doing anything. So we started Anne Arundel County Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and it's new. It's meeting regularly. It has subcommittees. We've asked them to come up with at least preliminary recommendations by December 15th of specific things that we can do. But one of those committees helped put together a memo on preemption, what the state has said we cannot do at the county level, and it's pretty tight language. A county, municipal corporation, or special taxing district in the state of Maryland cannot regulate the purchase, sale, taxation, transfer, manufacture, repair, ownership, possession, and transportation of a handgun, rifle, or shotgun, and ammunition, foreign components of a shotgun, rifle, or handgun.
How do you get around that?
Well, we have to change the state law to get around that. So we have to change the preemption law so that local communities can do everything. And that goes from research to public education to actually taking guns away and requiring registration at the local level. And I think that local jurisdictions can and should lead the way. It's best when it's national because then guns don't cross borders. But it's very different out in a rural area from an urban area. And when I was a community organizer in Chicago, the way that the police and the community viewed guns was very different than the way they view it on the farm. And I remember dropping down between the cars when you hear the gun pops going off across the street, just to get out of the way. And it's everywhere in Chicago. Okay. It's everywhere in big cities. So local jurisdictions have the freedom to be able to move forward.
Well, that is obviously a hurdle to be cleared. But let me ask Cassandra to speak to your first point. Stuart began by saying that he is optimistic. He cited the NRA's troubles, part of which are the very expensive suits Wayne LaPierre has been buying for himself. It raises, though, a larger question, which is public, in your opinion, and what at Bloomberg you've been able to study, is public attitude changing? Are public attitudes changing? And if so, what's the evidence of it?
Sure. So we, since the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012, we've been conducting national public opinion polling of adults on a range of very specific policies. So if you ask people, do you support gun control? People don't really know what that means, and generally they say, not really. But if you ask them very specific questions, do you support people being required to undergo a background check for every gun sale? We see 90%. Do you support police and family members being able to petition to get guns taken away from people who are temporarily taken away from people who are expressing a risk for themselves or others? We see almost 80% support. We hear a lot about background checks. They're certainly a really important foundation, but they're most effective when they're complemented with a system like we have in Maryland, which is a handgun purchaser licensing law. Maryland, we call it a handgun qualification license. And what that does is it requires anyone who wants to buy a handgun to apply to law enforcement to get fingerprinted, to submit to a more thorough background check for state and local records. And someone had commented earlier that if you go through the national instant check system and your background doesn't come back within 3 days, the default is that you can proceed with the sale. So 4,000, 5,000 people a year who are prohibited from gun ownership are getting guns that way through that loophole. In states with licensing, you're not allowed to buy that firearm unless you have the license, and you only get that license by completing the background check. Almost 80% of U.S. adults support this licensing process, including almost 2/3 of gun owners. These are policies that we know have broad support, and support's been consistent or increasing over time, regardless of the advocacy that we're seeing by the gun lobby or the NRA or the gun manufacturers. We see broad support for evidence-based policies that we know will reduce diversions of guns for criminal use, firearm homicide, and firearm suicide when you ask them specifically about them.
Rhonda Pindell Charles, both as a former prosecutor and as a elected official today, how much of this strikes you as achievable? And do you share Stuart Pittman's optimism that attitudes are changing?
Yes, I do. It's achievable, solvable, and I do share County Executive Pittman's optimism. We have a great working relationship, as our mayor has indicated, with our county folks, whether it's County Executive Pittman and our County Councilwoman Lisa Rodbian, who's been here all day, whether it's with our Senator Eldridge, whether it's with Delegate Kane and Delegate Henson, who was on our city council for a while. We have some great partnerships here that we can definitely tap into, including our federal partners, whether that be our Mr. Cardin down there,
We
as
are
well as
joined
Mr.
by
Van
Senator
Hollen.
Ben
Thank you
Cardin.
so much. So we are very optimistic. It's solvable and doable. One thing I'll say about our mayor, he has hired folks within his office to do this boots on the ground work. I'm kind of your councilwoman boots on the ground. We've had several initiatives that we've started. One is called the Street Corner Ministries Coalition, which was started 3 years ago by Minister Sharon McKell, Archie Trader, Melvin Colbert, and myself. We have 15 public and subsidized housing communities in Annapolis, 39,000 residents total in Annapolis. We've asked our faith-based communities as well as organizations, businesses, to adopt a community. It brings about accountability and sustainability. We're going to be in the parade on next Thursday, and we're going to have a banner because we've just started one initiative under that one entitled One Caring Annapolis. And of course, our mayor's theme is One Annapolis. And we have going to be every Friday night in these communities between 6 and 6:30, faith-based communities and others. And Arundel Lodge has been there this week. And Mr. Drummond, we're going to be there praying. No, there's nothing wrong with praying in coordination with the other things we're going to do. And based on my experiences, like I said, with Ann and 12 judges that I trained who are in every part of the judiciary and the Maryland system on the 4 levels that I've trained, my experiences say that it's health, and we've talked about that a lot today. It's education, it's transportation, it's workforce, it's housing. We have to look at every component. There's also an organization in Anne Arundel County called Cricket. And what they do is if I'm a parent and I have several children and I'm having some challenges, there's a team of folks throughout the county, whether it's DSS, DJS, and whomever, who sit down and talk with that person and say, this is how we can help you. Here's where the resources are. So, yes, I'm very optimistic.
Right.
It's doable. It's solvable.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Senator Ben Cardin is, of course, the senior senator from the state of Maryland. You can tell that he's from Washington. He has a suit. He wore a jacket, and his tie is still cinched up. So, it'll take him a little while to get out. You're outside the district now. Senator Cardin, let me give you a little context. This has been a day-long conversation with numerous panels talking about the phenomenon of gun violence in this country and in this, and no, you're not. It's going to be yours in 30 seconds. And just to give you the context, so a lot of discussion about the history of it, the background, the extent of it, the failed efforts in the past. And so now we come to the ultimate final panel of the day to ask you and all your panel members what can be done and how are you going to do it and what are your chances of doing it.
Well, first, thank you very much. I want to thank all of you for being here. Mayor Buckley, thank you very much for the invitation to join you. County Executive Pittman, it's nice to be with you and with all the members that are here. Let me just start. Tomorrow, of course, is the anniversary of the tragedy at the Capitol Gazette. It is one of the darkest days in the history of our community. I remember being here that day and just mortified by what I saw. And then when I heard the courage of the people that were killed, what they did, and the courage of the Capitol Gazette to continue on, it's an inspiration. But it also should inspire us to action. And a couple things I want to say about that, because we seem to change subjects every day. There's always something new. An Iran war that's close to starting up. Horrible tragedies on how families, migrant families are being treated here in the United States of America. And it's hard to stay concentrated on gun safety, which is something we can do and need to do and must do. So as important as all these other issues are, we've got to stay focused on accomplishing gun safety. Why? Because we're not only an outlier, we're by ourselves on gun violence in the world. 20 times more homicides in the United States than the average OECD country. Almost half of the civilian ownership of guns in the United States of America. 88.8 guns per 100 in America. The next closest country, 55, Yemen, in the middle of a civil war. We are outliers. 100 people killed a day with gun violence in the United States. 1,300 children killed a year in the United States of America. We are outliers and by ourselves. This has got to change. And we always run up against the saying that there is not a simple solution. There is not a simple solution, but inaction is not an option. So what can we do? Well, it's proven results that if you enact sensible gun safety legislation, you'll reduce gun homicides. That's a fact. We have the evidence in so many countries around the world that have done this and have proven results, and we have evidence and facts right here in the United States of America. States that have acted have reduced homicide, gun violence. It works. So what are we talking about? Universal background checks. Now you say you got to change public attitude. No, you don't. Because we're up to about 99.5% of the population that supports us on universal background checks. All we need to do is bring it up for a vote. Bring it up for a vote. Now, in the United States, the House has already done this. In the Senate, one person brings bills to the floor. Only one person can do it. It's the majority leader, Mitch McConnell. We got to put all the pressure we can on Mitch McConnell to bring up universal background checks. If he does, it will pass. It will become law. But that's not where you stop. That's not where you stop. I mean, you got to get rid of these military-style weapons and these large-capacity ammunitions holders. You got to get rid of that. There is no reason for it. And I'll tell you something. If you're a law enforcement officer and you're going against someone with an assault weapon, you don't have a chance. This is a matter of public safety. We got to get rid of those types of weapons. And I'll tell you something else. And it was mentioned last night in the presidential debates. We do need to do more research because this is a public health crisis. We got to figure out why is the mindset that so many people think they need guns. And let's figure out a way to reduce the amount of guns that we have. And there's some new things coming along we got to stop before they have these phantom guns now that won't be picked up by metal detectors. We got to make sure that doesn't become a weapon of choice here in the United States of America. So we have a lot of things that we can get done. Make no mistake about it. I just want to tell you of one additional effort we're doing on behalf of the 5 that were murdered a year ago tomorrow at the Capitol Gazette. And that is, we are attempting to put on the Mall of the United States Capitol a memorial to the fallen journalists. Since in the last 25 years, there's been somewhere around 1,800 journalists who have been killed in the line of duty globally. Of course, we know about the 5 here in Annapolis. You know about Jamal Khashoggi, the very visible case. But journalists are in jail. Journalists are being killed. This is a fundamental protection of our rights. The right on freedom of press is a foundation of our democracy. And when you get inspired by walking in the mall and seeing the heroes of World War II or World War I or Korean War, our presidents who really built this democratic state, we want you to also be inspired by the people who literally gave their lives here in Annapolis a year ago and recognize that journalists are responsible for helping to build this great democratic country. Thank you.
Senator, you're saying exactly what needs to be done. Let me ask you a piece of history. Were you in the Senate when Senator Dianne Feinstein, with the help of Susie Smith, her legislative director at that time, passed the assault weapons ban, which had a 10-year sunset, right? I think. Did crime go down? Did gun incidents go down?
Yes, I was there. I voted for it, and yes, it did go down. And when assault weapons came back, violence went up. So there is a direct correlation between that law and the number of gun-related homicide in our country. So yes, I supported that. And I want to make it clear, the 3 federal representatives from this region, Senator Van Hollen, Congressman Sarbanes, and myself, all are vocally supportive and acting to pass sensible gun safety legislation. So your federal team is committed to not only voting for, but to work to make sure it happens and to stay focused until we get this done.
I'm happy to take some questions from the audience if you have them, but there are many more specific issues to discuss here. Alice Kane, you had another piece of legislation, I believe, you and Sarah, on this topic, did you not? There were 3.
Yes, you mentioned the ones we supported this past session, the 3D printed guns or phantom guns.
Right.
The
So that's what you're talking about.
long gun, close the loophole there, and the handgun review board, which passed both chambers, but we have to override the veto. So those are the 3.
There was also the safe storage bill that would have increased the requirement to secure your guns. If right now it stops at age 16, so 16 and younger you're held accountable, but 17, 18, if a 17 or 18-year-old gets a hold of your gun in your home, you are not held accountable. We tried to raise the age to 17. 17 happened to be the age of the boy that I was speaking of earlier.
This is to have guns under lock and key.
Yes, that's right. And that one also did not pass.
Okay.
I'll add one thing about that. I'm looking at my notes because I want to get the number exactly right. But there were 3,410 children and teens who died from gun violence last year. That's enough to fill 170 classrooms.
Say that number again.
3,410 children and teenagers who died from gun violence last year, enough to fill 170 classrooms. In Maryland, 812 people under the age 25 were killed by a gun over the past 5-year period. So over
And
160.
So, Senator, when you bring up things like that to Mitch McConnell, what does he say? I'm not kidding. I'm not joking.
You know, he says he says that guns don't kill people, bad people do. That we have a lot of laws on the books, the constitutional protections. This is a liberal conspiracy. These numbers don't really not what you say they are. In other words, he doesn't have a reason. His reason for not bringing this to the floor is political. Now, that may seem a little strange because the politics is on the side of sensible gun safety legislation. But when you look at the states that he is most concerned about, and when you look at the interest groups that he wants to court, including not just the NRA, but gun manufacturers, this is an issue that he believes is best not to have on the floor of the Senate. He also doesn't want his members to have to cast a vote. Now, let me say why. If you come from a very conservative area and you do what's right and vote for this, then you may get a primary against you. And if you vote against the gun safety, you might find you lose a general election. So for incumbent senators, it's a hard political issue. It shouldn't be. I'm not making excuses, because if you don't believe in doing what's right, standing up and cast hard votes, you shouldn't be in the United States Senate. You shouldn't be in Congress. This is what you're here for. So I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm trying to do something that most elected officials don't do, and that's respond honestly to the question that was given to me. So it's outrageous. He will also go on to another subject. Don't let him go on to another subject. Let's stay on this and get it done.
Okay, Mitchell.
We have 4 questions.
Tell us who you are.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dora Brown. The reason why I'm here today is because my son got killed. He was 36 when he got killed over at Eastport. I really want this to stop. The guns really have to stop. It is getting out of control. It's a real bad situation for me because my mom had just died after my mother died. My son got killed by a family member. I have a picture of him. This is the picture of my son right here that had got killed by a first cousin. His first cousin was on PCP. So he had 85 years. They suspended 35. The girl survived, my son did not. He shot my son in his right eye, blew the pupils out his eyes, and I had to make a decision when I was going to take him off the life support.
You know, there it is. That's what we're talking about. Thank you. Thank you. Stuart Pittman, when you ran for county executive just recently, you did a lot of listening around the county to people. And did this issue come up? With what immediacy and was it an arresting issue or was it casually mentioned among many others? I'm trying to get again at the issue of public sentiment and whether it's changing. That's the point.
It came up when I went to a rally.
And on the topic.
The topic came up, yeah. I had to make a decision whether to go to this rally and decided to do it. I knew that it was going to create some backlash on social media. Didn't really know how it was going to play out in the election. I mean, I was running as a Democrat against a conservative Republican in a county that I was told was pretty conservative, and I really didn't know. And I think I had advice both ways. And then when I went, I posted some pictures of the rally, and I got a lot of commentary on Facebook from Second Amendment folks, and they're interesting. They're kind of, you know, go like sheep, where a couple go and then the rest follow, and it starts to build, and then they find you and they follow you and they continue to follow you. But you know, the question was, are those people going to vote for me anyway? You know, I always try to go to that and try to have that conversation and say, you know, I have a gun too, and you know, try to talk reason, and that's just all you can do. And I don't know how it played out. It certainly didn't keep me from winning the election, though.
Cassandra, does this issue have momentum? Is it more in the public consciousness now?
So I've been working on gun policy and gun violence prevention since 2010, and after the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, this is the first time that I've really sensed a sustained change. So there's research that says after a mass shooting, the average media coverage is about 8 days. 8 days. Lots of people die and they get talked about for 8 days, even less sometimes. And the students at Parkland decided not to let that happen, and they raised their voices up. They raised up the voices of inner city communities where they are experiencing the daily toll of gun violence. And I think we're starting to see a change because of that youth advocacy. Actually, as a result, we were given a very generous grant from the Packard Foundation to create two things. One is a free online course about gun policy. Anyone can take it, and it teaches about the epidemiology of gun violence, what we know about the laws, what we know about public opinion. And the other thing we've done, because we want to harness that youth advocacy, is we're bringing 50 students from all across the U.S. to Johns Hopkins, actually the second week of July. And we're hosting them there to teach them not just about data and policy, but how to be advocates. How do you lift up your voice and the voices of others who don't have the opportunity to speak? How do you talk to reporters? How do you deliver oral testimony? How do you take what you're learning and promote change, not just sort of being pointy-headed academics who sit and write papers all the time, but actually making change. And so we're very optimistic, partly because of this youth movement and partly because we're starting to see other communities and jurisdictions starting to move this issue forward as well.
It would be good. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead. Here's what we have. You see this thing right here? You know what that is? That's the boss. We have time for your question, Chuck, and then I'm going to ask each of you just to wrap it up for us with your final thoughts, okay? Go ahead, sir.
Chuck Hurley. First, thanks to all for what they're doing. And thank you, Senator, for what you and the folks in Washington are doing. My question, one of the most insidious things the NRA did is to restrict the funding of CDC for research. I think it was the Dickey Amendment in '95. And the Tiahrt Amendment later, which restricts ATF from distributing their gun database information. I understand some progress has been made recently, but what's being done to elevate CDC funding for gun research up to the level the epidemic justifies?
You're right. We have made progress in removing those restrictions and in funding. In this funding cycle, the House has already taken some action. In the Senate, we're optimistic that we're going to get some help in this regard. So we do believe we will allow CDC to start doing research in this area. I think that's one of the areas we will make progress in this Congress.
Okay, thank you for that, because I agree that was one of the more insidious moves, and at one point Congress removed 90% of the funding, so it was great. They said you go ahead, do the research. Oh, but there's no money, so it was effective. I really need to wrap it up. Maybe Short? No, not short.
Are you doing Q&A afterwards?
We've basically done it.
This is my shot. Okay.
Okay.
So on the 13th of June, a couple weeks ago, we had a gathering with a full house in Asbury on West Street, Asbury United Methodist Church, with the focus on do not stand idly by. I think you might have heard about that.
Yes, you mentioned it earlier.
Right. And so each of our senior elected officials here, the county executive and the mayor, no disrespect, Ben, but this the local in this case, indicated that they were going to sign on to that, and I understand that that's going to happen later today. I'm just curious, because again, some of the focus here, evaluate and test new gun security products, use data to identify manufacturers and retailers feeding the crime gun pipeline into our communities, work strategically with other public sector gun purchasers and investors,
Okay, so a couple.
that
minutes.
consortium
Well.
with other communities around the country. So you all haven't talked about it, so I thought I would lob you a softball and give you an opportunity to indicate why you think it's important to sign this today and what that means for the city of Annapolis and for the Anne Arundel County.
Mr. Mayor?
So I can wrap it up on that if we want to move down the thing. So I think we have a great opportunity right now. We have a great opportunity to exact financial pressure on gun manufacturers, and we need to exact that pressure against the manufacturers that produce armor-piercing bullets that are cop killers. I mean, we had our cops, our first responders, run into a building in 60 seconds and save lives. So we owe that to them. I think we can enact pressure because even though the city of Annapolis only has a small amount of buying power, and we buy guns and we buy bullets, the county has a bigger budget on that. But also if we join in solidarity with other communities on the same front, which is what this organization is promoting and what we learned in Toledo when I went there for the last gun conference, we can actually put some financial pressure and hurt these organizations in the pocket. And we owe that to the Capitol journalists. We owe that to stand up for them and not let their lives be wasted. I am proud to sit next to Alice and Senator Cardin here. I saw Senator Cardin on the TV last night promoting the Freedom of the Press memorial that they are proposing in Washington, D.C., and the one we, Freedom of the Press Day, we are proposing here. Every year we need to revisit that because every tragedy has its own identity. Our identity of our tragedy was these 5 journalists just innocently sitting around doing their job, right? What happened to them is going to affect journalism in this country. It's going to make people reconsider whether they want to do that as a profession. Is it worth it to put my life on the line just to work in a local newspaper? I'm not going to a third world country. I'm not going to a war zone, but can you die just speaking truth? And that's what journalists do. They speak truth to power. They seek truth, and they are the foundation of our democracy. They hold us accountable. So the very least that we can do is come together every year and reaffirm that their lives weren't wasted. So thank you.
All right, well, just a final thought, if you will, from each of you as we go down here and tell us, what's on your mind as we conclude a day like this.
Well, I think we should share best practices on getting things done. And to me, the lesson that I learned the best came from the Parkland students. I'm glad that example was given. They're not going to give up. They think it is outrageous that children are going to school today and they have to learn emergency training if a shooter is in their building. That's what this country has come to, and they don't want that for their children. So they're staying focused. And I know the Reverend just left. The petition drives that he's doing are important because he's staying focused on the issue. So my plea is, let's all work together. At the national level, the priority should be universal background checks.
That should be our priority because that we know will work. But there are funding issues. We also talked about the CDC. How about funding for mental health? How about funding for suicide prevention? How about those funding issues that would also help a good deal in dealing with some of these issues? How about literacy on gun safety so people understand the risk factors? So there's things we can do that can make a difference. Reverend, I was saying what you're doing is important because you're staying focused on the issue, and we need that. But a lesson we want to learn is from our children, particularly Parkland, because they're staying with the issue, and the students here in Anne Arundel County and Montgomery County and Howard County, they're working on the issue. So let's work with them, let's duplicate their energy, and let's stay focused, and don't let anyone off the hook for why we don't get results. Alice Kane.
So what's on my mind is the story of the mom who just shared her story with us about her loss. And I'm thinking about Wendy Wonder's daughter, who spoke to the Caucus of African American Leaders last year, just a few days after the tragedy, and said, "We don't want your pity, we want your action." And I'm thinking of Trey the Kid's sister, who I spoke with shortly after his death, who said she had lost, who's the third family member she had lost to gun violence, and she literally broke down and said, "I can't take this anymore. I just can't take it." So I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about the urgency, and that this cannot wait. And I'm thinking about the politics, because we know what to do, right? But getting it there, I'm giving money to Mitch McConnell's opponent. That's something we can all do, because he is an impediment. We can do that. But I'm also thinking about the politics in the State House. And one of the things that was sort of eye-opening to me as a freshman delegate, there's a text chain that a bunch of us freshmen started as we were trying to figure out our jobs, and things happen really fast on the floor sometime. So it started out just sort of, what's happening now? What does this mean? And sharing very basic things like that with each other. But it evolved into sort of this ongoing conversation when there were so-called tough votes coming up, where legislators would share, I'm going to vote for this, I'm going to vote against this. And when the and I will say right here, right now, I will always vote for common sense gun safety legislation. I know Senator Elfreth will, I know Delegate Henson will. There's also people who will never vote for it and are entrenched on the other side. But there are actually quite a few delegates somewhere in the middle. And before the big votes in the House on the common sense gun safety legislation, I'm looking at texts from some of the other freshmen saying, I know I should vote for this. I know it's the right thing to do, but I'm scared to about what the political consequences will be. And so every time the moms were up there sitting in the gallery with their red shirts on, every time they were there to greet us when we were walking over to the chamber, every time they came around and visited us, that really matters. And that particularly matters for those people who are on the fence, who want to have the courage but aren't there yet. Yes. So speak out, reach out, write letters, send emails, make phone calls, get your red t-shirt, go sit in the gallery. The do not comply people come sit there and stare at us too. That's another story. But you have a voice and it matters. And that's what it's going to take.
Thank you.
All right, so we demand action. We're Moms Demand Action. If you want to demand action with us, you can text JOIN to 64433, so that's JOIN to 64433, and you can join us. We have meetings here, local meetings here in the Annapolis area. You can get your red shirt, and I think that just to emphasize what Alice just said, advocacy is really important. Your lawmakers need to hear from you that you support these issues. We are going to be super aggressive at the beginning of the session in January to get that long gun background check loophole closed, and we need your help to do it. We were so close last time, and I think we're going to be able to push it over the line this year, but we're going to need your help to do it, because as much as we show up, the other side shows up too. And I just have to tell you that the talking points that they use are just broken record talking points. Stuart was talking earlier about what a success the emergency risk protective order law has been and how it's kept our community safer. The exact same talking points that they used against that, they're using against the long gun background check bill. They were wrong with the IRPA law, and they're going to be wrong with closing the loophole, and we need your guys' support. So again, text JOIN to 64433 and join us. Thank you.
Thank you. County Executive Stuart Pittman.
Well, first I want to thank Gavin Buckley and his staff for putting this on. I wish I'd been here all day, because I know I would have learned a lot. And I'm glad that some of you were here all day, including some of my staff. So, but what's on my mind is I'm glad that Reverend Tillett brought up the ACT meeting the other day, because I'm thinking about power. And Senator Cardin described the politics on the Hill, and that Mitch McConnell and some of his friends are concerned about some of the manufacturers, because they give the money and the power that's there, and the NRA, and I think a lot of that comes from the manufacturers. But the fact that we had 500 people at a meeting right here in Annapolis, and that people are fed up and they're mobilizing, gives me hope. And I think that's the key. And the end of my answer to your earlier question about how it came up in the campaign is that I think what I learned from the campaign, and I hope other people in politics are learning, and people like you who work to get folks elected, is that it's not zero-sum. So when I ran against Steve Hsu, he got the same number of votes in our election that he got 4 years ago when he won by 10 points. It's just that we mobilized, you mobilized a whole new group of people, and those folks wouldn't have been mobilized if we hadn't had issues like gun safety, where they were really pissed off and they worked a whole lot harder than they've ever worked before. And so that 10-point loss for 5-point win on our side, and it was new people that we mobilized around issues like this.
Thank you.
So I'm a policy person. I study public policy, so that tends to be my focus. We talked about background checks as a part of a licensing system, extreme risk protection orders, extending domestic violence prohibitions to dating partners. But I also don't want to lose the conversation that we had earlier today. It can't just be about policy. If this was a simple solution, we would have, simple solution problem, we would have solved it already. We need a multifaceted approach. We need resources being diverted to areas of concentrated disadvantage. We need employment opportunities. We need education. We need to think about mental health. This cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution, because gun violence is so different across communities, right? We have homicide in urban areas. We have suicide in rural areas. We have issues of safe storage. So we need to be thinking of across the spectrum, learning from so many of our partners here today. I'm just really grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you. Charles, are you a baseball fan?
Yes, I am.
Well, then you know what it means to bat cleanup.
I certainly do. And I'm going to bring up something that, as a cleanup batter, that no one else has brought up. We've heard a theme. We've heard many themes today, and part of it's been students. Dora Brown and I were high school classmates. We went through a lot in high school, and if you look at the history of Annapolis and Anne Arundel County, you'll learn a lot about why we have the problems we have here. I did not know Trey the Kid, but he was a distant cousin of mine. His mother and her siblings, we all grew up on Parole Street and Parole. But there is a history, and the older I get, the more I realize history matters. And to understand how we solve some of these problems, or a good many of these problems, we need to know the history of Annapolis. And a lot of the history is dependent on building trusting relationships in our communities. And my family's been here over 100 years, and I know the county executive's family's been here many centuries past mine. But anyway, unless you can build those trusting relationships in these communities, unless you've probably been here at least 60 years, you have to get with someone who knows and can promote that trusting relationship, because otherwise If you don't know Annapolis, you'll soon find out. Thank you so very much to everyone. Thank you, Mayor Buckley. Thank you so much for everyone who participated today. God bless you all. Thank you.